All right, so today we're going to talk about how to do a probe calibration. So right now we'll all head over to our CMM tab. And on my particular machine, you see that I have the 80 by 50 millimeter stylus already active. However, on your machines, you probably don't have a stylus. So let me simulate that right now. I'll release my stylus here, and we'll see that this will turn red. All right, so if it says stylus not defined, that just means that your probe is empty, just like it is when you start up the real machine. Now, this is kind of a weird thing. If you're in offline, ironically, this automatic probe change up here, this little A, doesn't work. Perhaps if you played around with it, you've already noticed that. But if you're online, this automatic A is how you're going to do your probe change. So for all of you, you'll click on that A. You'll left click on your 3D by 50 millimeter stylus, and then you'll right click and say load stylus system from holder. You'll see your machine do an actual tool change. Because I'm offline, I have to do it a little bit differently because the stylus changer rack is not configured. And as far as I know, we don't have the ability of configuring it because we need to move a probe over to the stylus rack in the real world, and well, there's no machine to be able to do that when you're offline. So when you want to do a tool change when you're offline, you'll hit this little hand icon, which is a manual tool change, and you'll simply say pick up stylus system. It'll tell you to insert the stylus system. You'll say OK, and then you'll pick whichever stylus system you want, which in my case is the 3 by 50 millimeter, and then you say OK. All right, now you notice the stylus system that I have here. This stylus system is already green, meaning it's already calibrated. And you'll probably find that on all your machines, it's already calibrated as well. Do any of you have red on that screen? It's going to be on the CMM tab. Do any of you see red here? If you see red here, even when you have a stylus in position, it simply means that it has not been calibrated yet. Okay, so our next move is we're going to click on the stylus system itself. And this is going to open up your stylus system management dialog. All right, so just click right on the probe icon itself in the CMM tab. Apparently it's called probing system qualification, sorry. All right, so we'll open up the probing system qualification dialog box, and this is very overwhelming. So let me break it down for you. Basically, the only things that you ever have to worry about is what is your stylus system. So that's in the upper left. It should say 3 by 50 millimeter right now. Underneath that, it has 1_-Z. You should recognize this from when you configured Calypso on your computers, right? This is just the stylus itself. When you have a star probe, you'll find that you have multiple different styli that you can use. So this is where you select which one you want. And really, the only other thing that we have to worry about in regular situations is qualify stylus. So this isn't going to work for us right now. We'll see why in just a second. When I click on qualify stylus, it asks me, do I want to overwrite my styli data? And I say OK. And I say OK to the pop-up. And when you're in offline mode, it just doesn't. It went and calibrated the probe in the background. But go ahead and try to do that on all of your machines. Of course, make sure your speed dial is set to slow. And then come over and click Qualify Stylus. And you should get an error that says something like, use master probe to locate stylus sphere or something like that. What does the error say? Yeah, it says, please qualify reference sphere with master probe. So it won't give you this error online because there's no machine attached to it. It's not even checked. Well, we do have to fix this in the real world if we want to calibrate our probe. Basically, Calypso won't let you do anything with calibration unless it already knows where your calibration sphere is. So our next move is we have to go change to our master probe. To change to our master probe, we can do this using the regular automatic stylus change here. Or you notice it's in the same window that we're already in as well, just for your convenience. So either one of those is your favorite. click on the A and switch over to the master probe. Now for me, I have to use the hand because I'm in an offline version. I'll go over and pick my master probe and say OK. So you will see that the master probe is actually loaded in the real machine when you do this. It'll put whatever stylus you have away, and then it will go grab the master probe. So this is something that I pretty much make this mistake every single time I go to calibrate a stylus. It's like I'm under the impression that because I haven't moved that calibration sphere, the software must know where that is. But every time you turn the computer off and turn it back on again, it forgets where that calibration is. And I've tried putting that on our image, it doesn't work. So every time before you do a calibration in each session, you have to tell it where that calibration sphere is one time. If we left the computer and the machines on all the time, we'd never have to retell it where this is with the master probe. But we do here, because we turn them on every time. So now we're going to come over to reference sphere position. So reference sphere position. That is right here. We'll click on that. And you'll get another dialog that shows you different possibilities for your reference sphere. Now, if you look at the reference sphere itself on your machine, you see that we have a couple of different threaded holes here. You can get some pretty complicated stylus systems going, and you may have to switch from one threaded hole to another. Right now, we just have a down probe. Zeiss calls a down probe a probe that's pointing, you guessed it, down. So whenever you're using a down probe, or even a regular star probe, you can just accept the defaults here. In fact, for anything we're ever going to do, you can just accept the defaults. All I want you to know about this menu is if you have a funky probe and it's pointing at a really weird angle, you may have to move the position of the master ball itself. You may have to thread this piece out. It's got two flats on it so you get it off. Then you thread it in either that way or that way, depending on which way your probe is pointing. You may also have to orient the calibration sphere differently on the machine. All right, but for us, we don't worry about that. We just hit OK. And then it asks you for probing behavior, and all of that is already set to the default as well. If you had a different type of head, like we have VAST XXT. If you had a VAST sensor, you can actually probe a lot faster when you're scanning, so that lets you set that behavior. We only have the VAST XXT, so the defaults are good. All right, now this looks a little different on mine because I'm in simulation and you're on the real machine. On the real machine, it should give you a dialog. It should give you a dialog that says probe in the direction of the stylus shaft. What this is really saying is you want to touch on the apex of the sphere. So if my left hand is the sphere and this finger is the probe, I'm just trying to do this so the video can catch it. You want to touch directly at the apex. You don't want to be off in the y-axis. You don't want to be off in the x-axis. So you want to touch right at the apex of the sphere. Now, another thing, this seems counterintuitive. You want the speed to be at full speed whenever you're calibrating. Otherwise, the entire calibration cycle will run at a lower percentage than it should. And that'll cause errors between what you got when you calibrated and what you got when you measured. So you want the speed dial to be full for this. I know, you probably thought I'd never say that. This. Now, another thing that helps with this process, to eliminate parallax error, which is when you're looking at something isometrically, it looks like they're aligned. And then you move your head and you look at it straight on and you're like, oh, that was very far off. How did that look like it was correct? So that's called parallax error. To minimize the parallax error, I would look directly at your machine, like I'm looking at Austin's machine right now. I look directly at it and I set the X. And then I would lean around the side and I look directly at it and set the Y. Right? If you're too far off, these cycles are extremely robust on these machines. I haven't had any problems with them yet. They'll simply alarm out and stop the cycle. On some of the other CMMs, I can't say that they're so robust. They'll actually fail mid-cycle, especially if you have an indexing head probe. If you're really far off when you start, you can actually crash the probe into the calibration ball as part of the cycle. All right, so you want to be pretty close to the apex when you start. Now, this cycle will take approximately 2 minutes. In fact, let's get a timer on it. This is something to get a lot closer. You want to be about 50 thousandths of it. Yeah, because the further away you are, the worse you can get closer to that. And then you see your error gets worse and worse as you get closer. Next. Again, you can see your line is pretty far out. Oh, excuse me. Go ahead and drive into it. Alright, so this is one thing I really don't like about this software. Anytime you try to calibrate any probe, you have to tell it this once first. So to me, that's a wasted 2 minutes every single time I want to calibrate because, well, usually I do all my calibration at the beginning of my session, and at the end of my session, I shut it down. And the other thing too, I don't move the calibration spheres, so it just seems painful to me. It's like, I already did this like 7 times since I set this up. Why do I have to do this again?
So if I change the probe, I want to calibrate another one, I have to also put it at the apex again?
No.
Or those are red?
Yes, it will remember the location of the calibration sphere for this session until you turn the computer off.
Okay.
As soon as you turn the computer off, it's going to make you tell it one time again. But again, the problem is that I'm always just calibrating one probe and it's in the same spot, so why would I want to do that? But it makes it. Alright, now I've also done calibrations before where I left the speed dial at like halfway in the calibration, so 4 minutes instead of 2 minutes, so it is sensitive to